Okay.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to our third Thursday tea talk for our death folks. I'm Lauren. Today I've always called you Elle, but we can say Angela, the intimacy artist. She's been a student of mine now for over a year and is a death worker, grief worker, intimacy worker. And I'm really excited to see how those all interconnect with each other today. So, welcome and thank you for being here, Elle.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you asking me. And you can call me Angela or Elle. I have, fully embraced all the names. So, a lot of times when I was in my photography days, people called me Miss Raven, which I always thought was hilarious. So, I'll answer to anything. Um, so today I'm talking about intimacy and death. To give you a little bit of a background of who I am, where I come from. My degree is in cultural anthropology with a focus on sex and death rituals. I was a boudoir photographer for many years, and with that, boudoir is a very intimate experience. And so things like body image, sexuality, how we feel about our body was coming up a lot. And so ultimately, I became a sexologist. I work as an intimacy educator and coach. I specialize in body image. So, how does body image impact how we show up in the world? How does it impact our relationships? How does it impact our sex life? I'm also a yoga instructor. I specialize in working with people with chronic illnesses and or disabilities. So I love to show people that yoga is accessible and adaptable for them and their body. I'm also a deaf educator. I started learning originally from Deathwives, and then I moved with Lauren over to Lamort, and I just love learning from you. So thank you so much, Lauren, for everything. Um, I also do a lot of chronic illness and disability advocacy work. So that's really important to me. I share a lot about my journey. I'm a stroke survivor who lives with a rare lung disease called chronic thrombotic pulmonary hypertension. So it is a form of PH, and that's been a huge part of my journey. And then the last thing I do is I'm a tarot reader. And that's kind of the last one is kind of what I do. Well, probably the last three are what you find me doing the most lately. So yeah. And I do want this to be a conversation. So I have slides. So feel free to interrupt me, Lauren, talk to me. Let this be a conversation.
Perfect. Thank you.
So, I don't know if you've ever heard of the two maidens of Pompeii. So, I was a military child, and my dad was Air Force. We lived all over the world. And so, when I was 9 years old, we moved to Italy, and that is Mount Vesuvius in the background. So, Pompeii was this ancient city that got destroyed by Mount Vesuvius. And I remember going there as a 9 year old and seeing these people, and that's like the bottom left image of two people crouched together, embracing each other at the end of their life. And it just really always sat with me, stuck with me. It was an intimate moment at death. And I just always remembered that. And I had no idea I would go on to study what I did, but I think that this was an impressionable memory for me that got me interested in exploring this deeper. And funny story, these two maidens are actually two men. They realized they had finally done some research, and they realized that yeah, they're male, but they are still called the two maidens. So that's kind of a little bit of background story. Had you heard of Pompeii, Lauren?
I know, yeah, I know Pompeii, but I just love that it's two men being intimate and holding each other and protecting each other. I mean, I feel like the maidens, women, like we're very good at cuddling and holding each other, but to find out that it's two men is really interesting.
Yeah, and it reminded me, I don't know if you saw it, but I saw it just recently, but I think it's an older video. And it was two men on a wind turbine that had caught on fire and they couldn't get out. So they were up at the top and someone was filming, but from far away. and they knew it was the end. They knew that they were going to die, and they actually just came together and they embraced each other. And you saw it in this video, and they were silhouetted. And it was, again, really far away, but you just saw these two men. And I think they were like 19 and 21. So they were very young men. And you saw them just embrace each other. And it just made me think again about the intimacy that we can experience in death, at the time of death, leading up to death. So yeah, I'll share that video with you if I come across it again.
Okay. Yeah, that's beautiful.
So I always like to kind of define things. What is intimacy? It's the state of being intimate, familiarity, something of personal or private nature. At its core, intimacy is about connection, right? And so when I think of intimacy, I think there's so many ways that we can have intimacy in our lives. And then when you look at the types of intimacy that there are, we divide them up into four groups. There's the physical, right? Mental, spiritual, and emotional. And I think leading up to death, too, we're experiencing all these layers of intimacy. And throughout our lives, these different types of intimacy might change throughout our life, right? Like maybe when we're younger, maybe there's a lot of sexual intimacy, and maybe that changes as we get older, as our bodies change. But understanding all the ways that people experiencing intimacy, I think, can help us see and broaden that there's a lot of ways we can maintain that connection, even as we're experiencing something as difficult as death. So there's intimacy with others, right? Like there's intimacy with our loved ones, our partner, our children, our parents, our friends, family, community. There's also self-intimacy. Like how do we feel about ourselves? How do we feel about our own body? And then there's intimacy with anything, right? And for this topic, it's what is intimacy with death? What is our relationship? What is our connection to death? And my guess is if you're here, you probably have an intimate connection with death, just like Lauren does, just like I do, right? And so a lot of what we're going to be talking about is exploring these different ways that we have intimacy and what that looks like. So I already mentioned there's the intimacy of death itself. We're going to dive into that. I think most of us here are probably fairly comfortable with that. But for a lot of our clients who we see, whether we're working as a deaf doula or a deaf coach, we may have to help them develop a deeper, intimate connection with deaf because that may be something that they've never connected to. Because, and we'll talk about those hurdles to the connection, right? And then there's that self-intimacy. How do we feel about ourselves? And this is, again, layered because how do we feel about our body? How do we feel about our body changing, especially as we start to go through the changes that lead up to death? But then also, how do we feel about our mental, emotional, and spiritual self, right? Because that all plays a role in how we face death. And then there's the intimacy before death and then after death. So we're going to kind of look at these different ways of having intimacy. Do you have questions so far?
I'm excited.
So, when I talk about the obstacles to intimacy, and it was interesting because I mentioned I'm a sex educator, and this slide is it is pretty much exactly a slide I have when I'm talking about sex and intimacy, because these fears exist, I think, in both realms. And I think for me, I see so much connection between sex and death because they're both taboo. They're both things that people are scared to talk about. And all these same obstacles exist in both realms. So, not knowing what we want, right? Not knowing what we want or don't want. And a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear around death. There's a lot of fear, again, because if we fear it, we're not connected to it, then we don't know what we want, what we don't want. And so fear, the fear of feeling like enough, fear of acceptance, fear of judgment, all these things are going to play a role in how we interact with death itself, as well as how we start interacting with the world around us. People pleasing, right? Sometimes we're in a people pleasing mode, and this can be seen in both realms of sex and death as well. A lot of times it's like we appease people, and maybe we don't really get what we want because we're busy trying to take care of other people. Then there's that perfectionism, right? And this is a big one for me personally, is I get stuck on perfectionism and then it's like, well, I don't show up because it's not perfect. And I think especially in death work, we have to let go of the idea of perfect because perfect doesn't really exist, right? And so it's like the perfect way to show up is just to show up. It's not like these requirements. And so letting go of this, like, I got to be perfect, I got to get it right. No, you just got to be there and be present. And then comparisons and expectations. Expectations are the thief of joy, right? Like a lot of times our expectations of what we think we want, when we don't get them, that can really put us in a place of judgment, of fear, of all these other negative feelings. And so letting go of those expectations, yes, we can plan and we can talk about things, and that's important, but then we also have to kind of let go, right? And avoid that comparison because our death journey is going to be unique to us. And I think every death journey is going to be unique to each person. And then there's like body image, right? As we go through life, our body is always changing. And so especially as we lead up to death, a lot of times body image, how we feel about our body, the way that our body looks, that can impact our ability to connect, to maybe touch our loved one, to hold their hand. And so, just being aware of this kind of helps to kind of overcome it. And then there's shame. Right. And again, shame is such a big one. It's in death and it's in sex. So much shame can impact our ability to show up. And I've had a lot of thoughts about shame recently. Um, there was a time when I always thought shame was bad. And I think that I was a big fan of Brene Brown for a while. And she talks a lot about shame. And what I've realized, and this is for me personally, is I think shame has a purpose, but I think that we need to be careful to not shame the person. Like shaming behavior is one thing, but to shame a person is another, right? And so when we talk about shame, I think it's important to have that distinction. And so when I talk about the obstacles of shame, it's like the shame that they feel as a person. And so making sure that we are providing a connection that is free from that shame, that allows people to show up as they are, is super important. And then there's trauma. And I mean, most people, I hate to see it, probably have some type of trauma in their life. And a lot of times that can impact our ability to be intimate with ourselves, with death, with other people. Are there any other ones you can think of, Lauren?
I was just going to say, I feel like trauma is a big one that people maybe don't realize because they've broken that connection with trust, even if they don't really see it that way. And I think that that's one of probably, the big obstacles is you have to trust yourself. You have to love yourself. You have to trust another person to be able to be open like that, even if it's just your mind and your thoughts and your feelings, because there's nothing worse than the shame part where you do open up and you say these things and somebody goes, "Oh, well, that's really stupid. I can't believe you feel that way." And then that makes an obstacle for future intimacy as well, because you've just had this experience where you're like, okay, I can do this. And I guess maybe that's what turns into trauma for a lot of people too. It's just intimate interpersonal relationships and how most people don't seem to know how to do that well. Like we haven't had the best role models of how to have intimate relationships with each other that
Mhm.
aren't sexualized, right? So,
Yeah. Absolutely. And you bring up a great point that I think to be in community, we have to learn to move through shame and trauma, right? Because and how do we resolve it in community and not disconnect? Because a lot of times our instinct is like, well, I'm never going to share that again, right? But
Yeah.
it's like not sharing that. It's like, okay, maybe I didn't share it with a person who could hold space for it, but that doesn't mean that it's not worthy of being said. It doesn't mean that it's not valid. And it doesn't mean that I shouldn't share it with other people who are in a place to receive it, right? All right. So the first one I like to talk about is cultivating a relationship with death itself. And I think that there's a ton of ways that we can help people do this. We encourage people to take classes, read books, just contemplate it. I love the idea of creating art. It's one of the reasons I love L'Amour is it's very art based. Attend a deaf cafe or a deaf disco. So I host a monthly deaf disco, short for discourse, but it's affectionately called deaf disco. But be in an environment where people are openly talking about death without fear or judgment in a place that's open and inviting. And it will help you to just kind of begin to have that closer relationship with death itself. Build a relationship with your ancestors. They're dead, right? So that's a beautiful way to start to cultivate this relationship with death. And then honor death in all the ways that it comes to us. I tell people all the time that death comes in so many forms. Like, yes, we're here to talk about the big D death, right? But there's all of these little deaths that I think we experience throughout our life. The death of a relationship, death of, a chronic illness is a death in a way. Like it's a death of a life we had or that we thought we were going to have. There's just death in different parts of our lives, right? Like when the kids go off to school, when, XYZ happens. And so I think finding ways to connect and honor death, whether it's through ritual, through presence, is going to help us to just be in a deeper relationship with it. I'm sure you have a ton of ideas too, Lauren, of how to create a relationship with death.
I really do think that the best way is to really look at the deaths in your own life and like everything that you just said, because I think to process the big D, the end, we have to process all the little endings that go throughout our lives. And I think a lot of that grief follows people through until the end if they haven't processed those little deaths. So, like, starting with having a relationship with just death in general and acknowledging again we're about to enter fall, right? Like
Mhm.
everything's about to die again, and that can help us have a better relationship with death, to really acknowledge like, okay, things are changing, these are dying, but guess what, they die, they become nutrients, they feed new life again, and in spring it will be renewed. So I think
Yes,
seeing it too as like, oh, this is necessary is a really way to cultivate a healthy relationship with death. And sometimes in that moment you can't see like, why was this necessary? But hopefully you can go back and say, because this happened, it doesn't always have to be the life-changing thing. It can be really small things, but typically there's the other side, right? And that's where you have to have the good relationship with death to be able to see all the other good that has in
absolutely.
your
I love that you bring up nature because
life.
that's my next slide.
Yay!
Part of having this intimate relationship with death, I think, is having this intimate relationship with nature, right? And you just kind of mentioned it, like the trees lose their leaves, right? And this is the photo I picked. Um, when we have this deeper relationship with nature, I think we develop a deeper relationship and we get to know death more intimately. Because again, you just mentioned it, like we see it. We see like, oh, this is death of this, cycle, but it's also the start of a new cycle, right? And so I think that our connection to nature can be a huge support in helping us with our relationship with death. Um, And I picked this photo because again, it's the tree with no leaves, but it reminds me of my lungs. So when I look at it from this perspective, it reminds me of like just the way the lungs look. And, when we can see ourselves a part of nature, we can begin to honor those cycles of our lives. We can begin to be like, oh, I am nature. I am a part of nature. That means I die. That means everything that love dies because this is all part of nature. It's part of the natural world. And I think it just helps us to kind of process it. So I'm a huge proponent in cultivating that relationship with nature.
I would say too, like reminder everyone, nature is made of our ancestors. Our ancestors died and returned to the earth. And so I feel like that's such a connection to have too. We talked about the different ways to connect with intimacy and death and connecting with our ancestors. Just go outside and sit down and really meditate on that. Put your feet in the earth, and you're putting your feet in the dead, as very dramatic as that sounds in this moment, but it's true.
I love that. I really love the idea of our ancestors become a part of this earth. They are a part of this earth, right? They return to the soil, they return to the earth. And so by connecting to nature, we can continue to like connect to them.
Mhm.
So yeah, I love nature. I'm a nature girl.
Yeah, me too.
All right, so we also have intimacy with our body, right? And this, I could spend a whole class talking about this, but it's just one slide. I put whether through aging or illness, our body can and will change. And as it changes, our relationship to it changes, right? And so just remembering, like, again, we're nature, we're part of nature. That means our body's going to change throughout our life and being okay with these changes, like accepting them. And when it comes to body image, I tell people you don't have to love every part of you. Like, I'm not asking you to like be super body positive, just body acceptance, body neutrality, just being like, this is a body and it allows me to exist in this world. And that's enough. And I love that. Like, and as someone, as a teenager, I struggled with body image. And as an adult, um, I lived on oxygen 24/7 for a couple of years. And I feel like so much of the body image verbiage out there was appreciate your body for what it can do. Well, that's really problematic for someone with a chronic illness or someone who is maybe actively dying because our body is not letting us do what it wants us to do, right? Um, but instead, switch that. What does my body allow me to experience? Because as long as you have a body, you get to experience this environment, this world, this whatever we exist in, right? And so, what does your body allow you to experience? It allows me to pet my cat, right? It allows me to go outside and crunch those fall leaves, right? And finding those joys in that. It's not about what it looks like. It's not about what it does. Because when I say what does it do, to me that ties it back to capitalism, which is problematic for me. My body isn't a machine. It is this beautiful vessel that allows me to experience life. And that is so beautiful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like your body can encompass joy and it doesn't have to, but that's the intimacy that you have to create with your body, is to change that mindset of this is wrong or this doesn't look this way. But yeah, acknowledging that my body is giving me opportunities every day. And
Mhm.
I think I had, me too. I think I don't want to say every teenager has had body issues, but God, like truly, whatever we have done as a culture for the last 30 years, we just go through this I'm not good enough phase. And then all of a sudden you become adult and you're like, well, fuck that. Like, I am. And I wish somehow we could go back, because I think my relationship with intimacy was so unhealthy because I had such unhealthy relationship with my body itself. So I think this is a really important one. And I really like that you addressed like if your body, what can your body do for you? And like that your body is not a machine. It's not supposed to do X, Y, and Z. It's supposed to hold your soul. And what brings your soul joy? Like your body can hold that for you. Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think this is a really important one as we come to terms of death because, you know, when we talk about like leading up to death, and again, every death journey is different, but the way that we start to interact with our own body, the way that we start to maybe share our body with other people changes, right? And so it's something I think is an important topic. Again, I think I could do a whole class on just this, but we'll move on. um, I love talking about agency. And I think that the more deeper connection that we have with death, the more opportunity we have to practice agency in our life and in death. And that goes with like how do we want to die? But if we're too scared to even contemplate death, we're never going to get to having that agency over how we're going to die. And so ultimately that connecting to death itself is the goal is to help us live a better life, but also to help us have this agency over death. It's the last thing we get to say, I feel like. So before death, right? And again, each one of these could be its own topic. Talk about death with our loved ones, right? And I always tell people like talking about death doesn't always have to be serious. It can also be fun. It can also be like, what kind of music do you want played? Right? Like, what kind of food do you want served? Do you have a certain poem? Like, it can be the fun stuff too. It doesn't have to be all the like, paperwork and that kind of stuff. It can be the more like connective parts of it. Make and share those plans. I think for a lot of people, they might think things, but they don't share them. And that comes with that intimacy, that comes with that connection of being in community of other people that can hold space for you. And so start to share your plans because if they're all in your head and you never write them down and you never share them, they're probably not going to happen, right? So the importance, and I think that that's an opportunity to have that deeper connection. I know, Lauren, I've shared with you that in my journey, so when I was diagnosed with my lung disease, I was given less than 2 years to live unless I could have surgery out in California. And I had to live 9 months not knowing if I would have surgery or if I would die. And those 9 months was this weird liminal space. And I would try to have conversations with my loved ones about death, and they would shut it down. It was like, we're not going to talk about that. It's not going to happen. And what I realized, one, I understood why, because we're very deaf adverse culture, but I felt like it was a missed opportunity for deeper intimacy had they let me shared. We could have had amazing conversations, right? But that wasn't available. And maybe that's kind of why I ended up here. But it's important that we find ways to stay connected in all those ways, the emotional, the mental, the spiritual, and the physical. Um, Do you have any other thoughts before I go on, Lauren?
I just, yeah, everything you're saying is so true. And it's interesting. I didn't really share this, but me and Elle connected because we have the same very rare lung disease. And so to find another PHer was like, what? It was while she was sharing something in class, I like private messaged you and I was like, Are you happen to be talking about this? And I remember, my diagnosis was 5 to 8 years, and now I'm doing great. But I remember those first 3 months of them trying to figure out like, what am I going to get a pump in my heart? Am I going to have to do these meds? Am I going to be on oxygen all the time? And just really having to grieve what I thought the end of my life could look like. Um, I've always been death accepting, but of course, I was like, well, what's it like to die of, right-sided heart failure? Oh, that's not great. What's it like to die from this? And so it really was me having just this like, I don't ever want to say acceptance, but a new relationship with my body and what it will do and what it won't do, and that my life will be shorter than most people's. And I think having the conversations with my family about all of this was way harder than I was expecting. I'm in there like, yeah, okay, I'm gonna live a shorter life. It's okay. Like, I have everything planned. And I guess my grief was, I have two children, and that was what I was worried about. But they didn't want to talk about any of it. I think that that's really common, is that it's the caretakers and the family members who are like, please, no. But the person who's dying probably is thinking about it a lot more than we, the outsiders of the dying experience, realize. And so I do think it's really, really important to just keep talking about it. And if you can't talk about it, to definitely make those plans, because I thought in a weird way it was kind of freeing in a way, knowing like, okay, my life will be a little bit shorter. And it's really important that I live every single day. And I think it takes having these conversations to make you realize, like, oh, yeah, we're all going to die someday. Even for the person who's not at the end of their life, like, these conversations are so important with the family members because they get to contemplate it for themselves.
Yeah. And you're right. Like you said, your family had a harder time talking about it, just like my family did, right? And it's, you know, I'm in the deaf coaching program right now with Lauren, and I think being a deaf coach is it's like it's a lot of like how do we support the caretakers, and it is like how do we help them have a more intimate relationship with death so that they can hold space for their dying loved one too, right? Because we're really trying to help them to maintain that intimate connection with their family because it's really lonely to be dying or feeling like you're at the end of your life in some way and not have those connections available to you. That's a very isolating experience. And I don't want people to experience that. So, how do we help people? And how do we help people just as a culture? Like, how do we help our culture? And I think that's what all of us are here to do, right? All of us who are deaf educators are here to do. Okay. Um, Presence is sacred, right? And we know that. And so often I think people don't know what to say or they're scared of saying the wrong thing. They feel like they have to be perfect. All those obstacles that we talked about. It's like just be present, just hold their hand, right? Like just show up. That's really what's necessary. Listen, like that active listening, right? Like that is what matters. And so doing that can do so much for your intimacy. Like just showing up, sitting on the beach. Like that's what I want at the end, right? Like I just want someone to show up and sit on the beach with me. That's what I'm saying. So, I do like to just kind of touch on the senses because, leading up to that, when we talk about like body image and all these things, the changes that the body goes through, it's really important that we're paying attention to the senses because the senses are set up for connection, like connection to self, but also connection to intuition, to divine, whatever you believe, but also connection to each other, right? And we know that the senses change as someone is dying or with an illness, right? I'm a stroke survivor, so my proprioception and vestibular are not so great some days, right? And all these things can affect how I'm relating to my own body, therefore how I'm relating to other people's bodies. So just recognizing that the senses are playing a powerful role in our ability to have intimate connections with everything around us. The importance of touch, right? We know how important touch is for humans. Like it is one of our most primal needs. And when someone is dying, I think that a lot of times there is this fear of like, I'm going to touch them, I'm going to hurt them. It's like they need that touch. They need that, like just holding the hand, just like your hand on their arm, massage, like Reiki, like all these things, right, can be a huge benefit to building that intimate connection with someone who needs us, who needs our support.
I was just gonna say, I think about babies. I remember learning about this when I was little, of like if they're not held enough, they
Hmm.
can have failure to thrive. And I think about that too with elderly people, because it kind of we go full circle. We go back into this childlike space. And at that time of their life, most of the people who are touching them are medical,
Absolutely.
not that intimate touch. And when we know it's so important for babies, why do we forget that it's so important for us throughout our whole life?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I mean, it doesn't, I haven't talked a whole lot about like intimacy in the terms of sex, but I will just slightly later. But intimate touch is about more than sexual touch. It is just like that holding of hands, that clasping, right? That gentle touch on the face, that kiss on the forehead, right? There's ways that we touch each other intimately that help us bond, that help us have that connection. And like you said, we know it's important at birth. Of course, it's important at death and throughout our life, right? And so it's like just remembering that importance to build that connection. After death, like how do we want our body treated? And when I thought about this, I was like, okay, there's like obviously the body disposition, but there's also like, do you want your body prayed over? Do you want it anointed with oils? Do you want a smoke cleansing? Like, what kind of intimate interaction do you want with your body once your soul has left? Because I think that's important too, not only for you, but also for your loved ones, right? Because I think that's a very intimate time that our loved ones can spend with our body to help them process our death, right? But also just like thank our body. And so after death, like reminding people that you can still have intimacy after death, right? And when I think about funerals and memorial celebrations, I'm like, those are more opportunity for intimacy, not only with each other, like all the people who are left behind. But when we share stories of grandpa or grandma, like we're maintaining that intimacy with them through that story, right? So me sharing that story of my cousin or, sharing the story about my grandmother with my cousin not only connects me to my cousin, it's also connecting me to my grandmother, right? And so finding those ways to have that deep intimacy even after death. And then how do you want to be remembered, right? I know I shared with you, Lauren, yesterday those portraits, right? And I thought that was so cool. But yeah, like how do you want to be remembered? Like do you want to pick your photo that you want? Like do you want to like have an epic photo shoot and create it? Is that part of your, getting intimate with death? But I think that there's so much opportunity in after death to maintain these connections. And then I put after death. Because when I first thought about death, I thought about like the immediate first hours, days, weeks, right? But what about after death? Like, someone's been gone years. I always tell my clients, like relationships continue, they just change. Like just because they're dead does not mean I don't have a connection. This is my dog Kara, Care Bear, and this is how I stay connected with her, right? I still honor her, I still talk to her. So talk to them, write them, build an altar for them, honor meaningful dates in ways that feel right for you. You can still have a connection with your person, with your people, with your animals in death. It just looks different than it did before, right? And I think that's super important. Okay, so this is where I do talk a little bit about intimacy. And when I say intimacy, it can be sex, but it doesn't have to be, and grief. The first thing is let go of expectations. Like, there is no one way to think that someone handles death and release judgment, like for yourself and for what you think that thing should look like. Um, I think that there is this sometimes misconception that when someone's diagnosed with a terminal disease, that they stop caring about sex and intimacy. And in my experience, both personally and professionally, that's not always the case. And for some people, um, it can actually go the other way. Like some people actually start to become more sexual when they get a terminal diagnosis because it's like sex is literally life. It is like it is creation, and I'm not just talking about like pregnancy. It is creative energy, right? It is creative force energy, and it is a way to like almost like I don't want to say like fight death, but just kind of like I'm alive still, right? And so having this expectation, and I personally experienced this a lot with my own doctors, is they assumed, oh, you've been told you have 2 years to live, you're on oxygen, you're not interested in sex. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Of course I am, right? And so I just think like letting go of that judgment or that expectation, like, oh, I shouldn't be thinking about sex. You're allowed to think about it if you want, right? And there's ways to maintain intimacy and connection leading up to death, sexual and non-sexual, right? And one of the things a lot of what I do when I work with sex coaching clients is I tend to work a lot with people with chronic illnesses and or disabilities. And one of the things I work with them on is expanding their definition of sex because we have a very limited view of what we think sex is. And so when we can expand that and realize that sex doesn't always even involve genitals, right? We can really expand our intimacy in all kinds of ways, right? But we have to like release that expectation that it looks a certain way and release that judgment for ourselves, right? And I'm sure maybe we're kind of in the same age bracket. Did you ever see High Fidelity?
Oh, yes. I love John Cusack.
Yes, me too. Well, so I'm sure you remember the scene that after the funeral, they like go to the car and they have sex,
Hmm.
right? And it just kind of reminded me like of that, like it's life affirming in a way, right? And so a lot of times, whether it's our loved one who's dying or uh when I say our loved one, like a partner, or whether it's just someone who we love in our life, we all may experience um, a way that we want to be intimate differently. Like maybe we want hot sex in the car right now, right? Maybe we want, you know, anonymous sex. Maybe we want deeper sex, like whatever, but like letting go of how you think things should look. And after grief, like again, after we lose someone, we change, right? Like what we want changes. And for some people, they do want to go out and have this like intimate, or maybe they just want sex and not the intimacy part. But again,
Mhm.
just releasing that judgment and expectations because it can look so many different ways. So
I've
just
had,
wanted to touch on that.
yeah, I've had so many students share over the years this same exact conversation where, why am I so horny after my dad died? And I think it's everything that you're talking about. It's that connection, it's that intimacy. And again, we're like releasing feel-good endorphins as well. And I also think that it's moving energy in a way as well. But yeah, I wasn't surprised, but I was surprised at how many people felt judged by that. But it was really them judging themselves of like, what's wrong with me? Like I should be really sad right now. And I know a student who slept with another person the day after her husband died because she just needed to. And
Mhm.
she was like, I've never told my family, I can't tell anyone. And I'm like, but that's beautiful. Like, you're not cheating on your husband. What's the
Yeah.
judgment there? She was like, it was the self-care that I had needed. And I think about intimacy. I think you said this, it is self-care, like really, when we think about it. So it it is something that's not talked about enough. And back to the person who's dying, like young people especially are like, I still want to, and nobody wants to touch me now because I'm sick or I'm too fragile or anything like that. I'm a huge supporter of sex workers working with people at the end of life. Like I would love to see that become normalized. I know being a sex worker isn't legal, but that's stupid and that's a
Yeah.
whole other conversation.
Yes.
But I think that that's a support just as much as palliative care.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think that we judge ourselves. And I think part of what we can do as deaf educators is remind people to like release that judgment,
Yeah.
right? Like so much of what I do as a sex educator, I swear, is like people come to me and I was like, is this normal? And I'm like, there is no such thing as normal.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna start there because it's not not normal because there is no normal. Like it's you're allowed to experience and feel whatever you are. And that's
Mhm.
part of that acceptance, right? That's part of like that deep intimacy with yourself and honoring all the parts of you, even when they don't always make sense. And so
Mhm.
um again, we kind of touched about that. Like you said, your student like it almost like they had shame about it, right?
Yeah.
And that shame leads to disconnection from ourselves and from others. And
Mhm.
so, how do we release that shame of like, it's not shameful that my body wants this, that my body wants this release, that my body wants these endorphins, right? Um, because when we hold on to shame, it's like we're really like preventing ourselves from having this connection. Vulnerability and intimacy. Like vulnerability is required. Again, I've already said so many parallels, but sex and death both require this vulnerability, right? And our fear of vulnerability is often what keeps us from having deeper intimacy with ourselves and others. And so, how do we start to be vulnerable with our people? How do
Mhm.
we hold space? And how do we express ourselves when they're scared of our own vulnerability, as we often see? So creating intimacy. First one, you have to embrace that vulnerability, right? You have to recognize that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's actually courage. And we
Mhm.
have to be willing to communicate, to share, to express ourselves. And we have to also practice active listening, like listen to our people, have them listen to us. We both, communication is a two-way street, right? And then practicing that mindfulness, which is part of that presence. And that is something that I think is really hard in this day and age in our culture because we're just so like, and especially right now, information comes so fast that it's easy to get overwhelmed. And so it's really a practice to be like just here and present in this moment, right?
Mhm.
But having that time and space, creating those containers is going to help have deeper intimacy. Stay curious. In a world that's constantly telling us who we are, what we want, and how to be, it is paramount that we still stay curious and connect to ourselves in order to just, I can't talk, in order to connect to ourselves to discover what is right for us, right?
Mhm.
And again, this was another slide that was actually on a sex ed slide. And I was like, you know what? It transfers. It
Yeah.
stays. I was
Yeah.
like, this is coming over. Because it's true. Like, and again, when we talk about death, like, yeah, like maybe our family for has a fast few generations done embalming and done this and done death this way. But like, if we're curious, like, what else is available? What else is an option? What is right for us? Because, and I think death, part of that agency, it is the last thing we get to do that allows us to live our values in this world. It
Yeah.
allows us to be like, who am I? What type of person am I? What are my values in life? And what is the legacy I want to leave? Right.
Mhm.
And so staying curious is going to help us to just figure out what is right for us. Because again, what's right for me may not be right for you, and that's okay.
Yeah.
It's so funny because I saw that your intuitive class was coming up, and I was like, this is in my slideshow. But yeah, and this is another one that carries over on both, both subjects. The body is intuitive. It often knows well what it needs and wants before we consciously know it. So
Mhm.
listen to your inner knowing. Paying attention to our body's reactions can offer us insight, but we have to release that judgment, right? Like if your body wants sex, like release that judgment because the body knows like, oh, this is going to help me. Or if it wants to cry, right? The body is like, it needs to cry. The body knows that it needs to do it, but you're the one like who's like, no, I can't, like holding on to control instead of just like allowing it to flow, right? And I love this quote, The Alchemist, one of my favorite books. Intuition is really a sudden immersion of the soul into the universal current of life, right?
Yeah,
And so just being intuitive, allowing intuition to guide your intimacy.
not fight it.
Yeah. And then I put becoming more intimate with death, we deepen life. We deepen our life connections and are able to live a more embodied and meaningful life. Because I truly think that the more intimacy we have with death helps us to have more intimacy in our relationships. And the more intimacy we have in our relationships, the more intimate we are with our own body, the more we start showing up in our life. And the more we start embracing this life that we have right now.
Definitely.
That's all I have. This is the way to reach me if you want to reach me. And I will stop screen sharing. I don't know what time it is.
We're good. It's
We're good.
12:53.
Okay.
Yeah. Good
Okay.
job.
So yeah, I'm happy to chat if you have thoughts, questions, if you have any insight. I'm all
Yeah.
yours.
I'm currently going through a lot of this with my best friend who has stage 4 cancer. And it was interesting. I've now been to the hospital with her 3 different times. And this last time was the closest that she's come to death. And it has completely changed. Like she needed help changing, things. And she was like, "Can you help?" And I was like, "Yes." Before she was so embarrassed and like, "Don't look at my body. Don't, everything looks different now because of the cancer." And this time she was just like, "Oh yeah, none of that matters." And it was just like something clicked, and the intimacy with others. She's letting friends visit her at the hospital when she never let anybody, she didn't even let people know that she had cancer until this last week. And she
Mm,
was diagnosed in March. And I think that she needed to have that intimacy and acceptance with herself before she could start inviting other people in. And I had a hard time. I was definitely judging her of, why are we not talking about your death? Why are you not letting people in? Why are we not doing any of this? And I think, again, it's that judgment of, why is my body doing this? And I'm going to fix it. It's not going to fail me, and getting mad about it, to the other side of, people have to care for me. And I think that that's really hard for a lot of people. Like, what do they always say? The hardest thing for most people to do is ask for help.
mhm.
And at the end of life, that's typically that intimacy block that I see a lot, is people are like, "Well, I don't want to burden them." And I don't. And what I told her was like, "I've been longing for this. I've been longing to be able to help you and step into this role to be able to support you. So thank you." And I really hope that people who watch this, or people who just are interfacing with people who are dying, like, give them space and give them time, but just again acknowledge when they do, like, thank you. Like, I think thanking them builds that trust and that intimacy and that connection of like, what you just did is just important and meaningful to me too. So thank you for helping me get into that area with you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. And I think you're right. I think that, you know, again, it's like I don't want people to see me sick. I don't want people to see this side. And so
Mhm.
it's like we push people away, but that affects our intimacy. And that may have been where they were at that time. But it's like now that they've obviously had whatever experience they've had to come to this point. And it's like now you're like, I'm ready, right?
Mhm.
And it's like when people are ready, like showing up without that judgment, without that resentment, without that, with letting everything else go and just being like, I'm here. Like this is connection. And I think that being sick just in general, I'll say there is such an opportunity for deeper connection. And in my experience, I've seen my clients who have an illness or disability often have deeper, intimate relationships than some of my able-bodied clients because they
Hmm.
have to,
Hmm.
because they have to ask for help, because, right? And so you can see this as an opportunity to dive deeper into this intimate connection with loved ones.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for everything today and really showing that there's so many different forms of intimacy. And I think when people hear that word, they automatically go to sex, which we talked about it briefly at the end there, that that is still very important. But really, it's connection. Like when you said that at the beginning, intimacy is connection. I think that that's what we need to remember, connection of soul to soul, mind to mind, hand to hand. That is intimacy. And we have such, I think, especially at the end of life when there's already grief mixed into it, it's also hard. Like, I don't have judgment against family, but I've seen families not want to touch their person because they grieve it. And so to support somebody and say, that's your grief, and we want to love that grief and we understand it. And also, they want you to touch them and like hold their hands, and that's okay too. And guess what? If you cry in front of them, that's okay too. Like, does it make them sad? Maybe, but probably not. I've always said if I'm dying and everyone around my bed is just completely stoic and not crying or not like touching me or hugging me, how like lonely in a strange way of like, don't you care? Don't you love me? And I think that that's intimacy too, is showing those emotions and being able to, I guess that's the vulnerability, right? On both sides of being able to trust the other person to be able to say, you know what? This is what I'm feeling. And maybe even I'm stepping outside. Maybe it's that trusting yourself. You said that before of like, this doesn't mean I have to stop telling my story because this person didn't accept it or like it. And so continue to be emotional, continue to have intimacy in your life, even if you were rejected once, or even if it didn't come across right to someone, because that is like the most basic human part of us. Like the babies. If we're not held as babies, we will die. So if we don't have intimacy through our lives, isn't that a tiny death over and over and over again?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, Elle, so much. And
Thank you.
um, yeah, I can't wait to continue to learn with you in the future. And thank you for everything that you do because I know that it changes people's lives and we need more of yous in this world.
We need more of all of us in this
We need
world.
more of all of us. Thank you, everyone who watching, and we'll see you next month. Bye.
Bye.